Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching TopTenzNet. In the video today, the top 10 popular pieces of movie trivia debunked. From WatchMojo.com pre-shows in movie theaters to, well, top tens, everyone wants to provide small novelty pieces of information about beloved movies. Unfortunately, the high demand means that the product has gotten a little bit diluted over time. Misunderstandings or even outright lies now permeate the pop culture landscape. We're inclined to believe a lot of them if for no other reason than the reputation that people have in show business for being weird or for crazy things to happen when millions of dollars are spent on make-believe. Number 10. Aliens gender flip. Since Ellen Ripley's status as the main character and sole survivor, not counting the cat, of the Alien franchise was a surprise in the original film of the series, the part being played by Sigourney Weaver instead of, say, her then more famous male co-star Tom Skerritt made it a subject of a lot of discussion from 1979 onwards. One of the claims that's popped up over the years was that the character was originally intended to be a man. This seems to be a carryover from the gender-flipped character that Ruth Leavitt had in the slightly less famous 1971 science fiction classic The Andromeda Strain. None other than screenwriter Dan O'Bannon refuted that story. He clarified that intentionally none of the characters were gender-specific in his script, so that the casting director could take care of that. He had even included notes about this decision on the last page of his original screenplay. We'll leave it up to you to decide what this means about gender roles in fiction. Number 9. Johnny Depp, Jackie Earle Haley. It's a classic story of an audition with a comical twist. Someone who doesn't even intend to be an actor is just going along with a friend to an audition for a job. Then it turns out the casting director prefers the friend who isn't even intending to act, and that person goes on to be a big star. Something very similar to that actually happened to Bob Hoskins, for example. The single most famous example of this would likely be in 1983, when Jackie Earle Haley brought Johnny Depp along for a role in A Nightmare on Elm Street and ended up launching his friend's career. Then, for a fun coincidence, Jackie Earle Haley was cast as Freddy Krueger for the 2010 remake. Except, well, no. Haley clarified in an interview in Esquire that all of this talk of him and Depp at the audition was just a rumor. He doesn't even know what the origin of the rumor could be, just that he's absolutely sure he didn't bring Depp to that audition. Number 8. Daniel Day-Lewis's insane method acting. Daniel Day-Lewis is as much famous for his extreme method acting as he is for winning 3 Academy Awards for Best Actor. For example, playing the primarily paralyzed Christy Brown in My Left Foot involved him staying in a wheelchair for the duration of the shoot. He supposedly also insists on only being referred to by his character's name. It's all designed to instill the belief that he spends all day trying to think of himself as the character in some maniacal workshop of the acting profession. On the podcast I Was There Too, Paul F. Tompkins, who worked with him on There Will Be Blood, clarified that Lewis wasn't so insanely in character at all. Between takes, he would discuss the characters as if they were characters, and he wouldn't insist at all on being referred to by his character's name. He was also totally fine with dropping the accent once the shoot was done for the day. Indeed, as Tompkins opines, it would be an indication that Lewis isn't a good actor if he makes others uncomfortable with such unreasonable demands. This is because part of the nature of being a good actor is to pay attention to the needs of your collaborators. Number 7. Tricking Alan Rickman. No, this isn't an assertion that it's untrue that Alan Rickman was ever tricked. This is referring to a story that in order to get a better reaction out of Hans Gruber for the shot when he is dropped off Nakatomi Plaza in Die Hard, supposedly the director told him that he would be dropped on the count of 3. However, to get a genuinely shocked reaction before Rickman had properly braced himself, he was dropped on the count of 1. Sorry to ruin everyone's fun here, but Rickman was asked about this very thing during a Q&A event. He unambiguously didn't remember it happening. He did remember other specifics around the event, so it's extremely unlikely that this would have happened because it would have stuck in his memory. Also, considering that he remembers the drop height being 40 feet rather than the generally reported 25, he certainly wasn't downplaying anything either. Number 6. Al Capone's Tailor. Bringing it back to method acting, we all know that probably the second biggest method actor in the world was Robert De Niro, who was a method actor for years and years, starting with becoming a real cab driver for weeks to prepare for his role as Travis Bickle in 1974's Taxi Driver. By the time 1987 rolled around for The Untouchables, the news went around that De Niro was supposedly personally tracking down Al Capone's tailor so that the pajamas he wore, and even his underwear, matched the crime lords. As was pointed out by others, well, after this misconception spread, Given that there was a 56-year gap between Capone's incarceration and the production of The Untouchables, Capone's Tailor was very unlikely to be in the right shape to work. For one thing, Capone's Tailor was actually Louis Donato, an associate of Capone's whose main noteworthy aspect was being repeatedly questioned by the police, even after Capone was imprisoned, all to no avail. The person who actually did the costume work for De Niro was Rich Bruno, and given that he was only 52 when The Untouchables was made, it would have been quite a trick for the costumer to be tailoring for Al Capone. Number 5. Spider-Man's 156 takes. This one has been a favorite of trivia sites for years. Somehow, Sam Raimi's 2002 film Spider-Man had enough time in the production schedule to devote hours and hours, if not days, to shoot 156 takes of Tobey Maguire catching a tray full of food. Now granted, in 2002, CGI, affordable enough for a throwaway gag, wasn't quite up to scratch, so there's plenty of reasons to do it mechanically instead of with computers. But Maguire didn't do it alone, and the 156 takes claim is certainly a joke, evidenced by the fact that in its source, a commentary track, the commenter gets a laugh from it. It explicitly was a combination of using a mechanical rig to drop the food and gluing the tray to Maguire's hand and using force-absorbing gel on the bottom of said food. In fact, if you go frame by frame, you can see a white substance stuck to the bottom of the apple. This at least confirms it wasn't CGI, since why would a CGI artist put that in there? Still, it certainly puts this fact back in the SFX category. Number 4. Werner Herzog's shoe bet. Errol Morris and Werner Herzog are two of the most interesting documentary filmmakers working today, and their film careers were connected in a rather befuddling way. Errol Morris began his career in 1978 with the cult documentary Gates of Heaven. This was particularly beloved by Roger Ebert. The movie was made at a time when he had little funding, and getting distribution for the film would have been extremely difficult. Herzog came up with a bizarre bet to motivate his friend. If the movie were completed, Herzog would eat his shoe at the premiere. It was enough of an event that a short film was made of the preparation of the meal. Then Morris came along during a Q&A session at the Lincoln Center and revealed that they actually didn't have a wager. It was just something that Herzog had made up as an excuse to eat a shoe. Not wanting to be comedically upstaged, while telling the truth about this, Morris said he would joke for years that the bet had actually stipulated Herzog's foot. Number 3. The Dark Knight's remote futzing. Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker in this 2008 blockbuster was so compelling that much of his manic behavior felt completely natural, leaving audiences open to the notion that even the biggest parts were improvised. A scene where the Joker claps in jail is an example, but the best-known example is the scene where the Joker is blowing up Gotham General Hospital, but stops when there seems to be a problem with the detonation. In what was alleged to be improv, Ledger messes with the remote, and then the explosion resumes, leaving him to scramble onto the bus. As director Christopher Nolan explains in a behind-the-scenes feature included on the Dark Knight Blu-ray, the sudden stop in the explosion and the Joker's pause was actually planned in advance. In fact, Warner Brothers provided a CGI mock-up of how the scene would be staged as evidence. That's much further than most studios go in debunking a piece of trivia. Number 2. Citizen Kane's non-plot hole. Since this 1941 film has for decades been known as arguably the best ever made, it was a delight for film buffs and critics alike to claim that the story has a gigantic plot hole right in the middle of it. Is that the titular Kane's last word was Rosebud, and it was supposed to be said to an empty room. This begs the question of how anyone heard what his final word was if he was alone. There was a story circulated that this was pointed out to Orson Welles by a member of the crew, and Welles responded with some variation of, "Don't you ever tell this to anyone." The problem with the plausibility of that little story is that it's not consistent with the content of the movie. While the opening scene has been watched by cinephiles and parodied many times by shows such as The Simpsons, the scene's person who heard the words doesn't appear until much later. Very near the end, the reporter that's been spending the movie trying to learn from Kane's intimates what Rosebud could mean has a brief chat with the butler, Raymond, who explicitly says he's the one who heard it. Raymond's other main contribution to the movie is telling the reporter about the famous scene where Kane wrecks his room until he sees a snow globe and says Rosebud for the first time. So if someone had asked Orson Welles about who heard the words, Welles would have just said Raymond instead of acting as if his entire movie were in jeopardy. Number 1. Being John Malkovich's beer can. A lot of the trivia that we're looking at today took a lot of effort to debunk, or a celebrity wanted to set the record straight. In this case, the thing that disproved it was completely unintentional. Indeed, the performer in question might not even have heard of the false story. In Being John Malkovich, there's a scene where the titular actor is walking by a road while he's in a rut. An extra in a passing vehicle yells, "Hey Malkovich, think fast!" and throws a beer can at his head. Supposedly, the scene was completely unscripted, and instead of being rebuked for potentially ruining a take, the actor got a raise. Some versions even say that he got a Screen Actors Guild card. The truth didn't come out until Malkovich was doing a question and answer session known as an AMA, Ask Me Anything, on the popular website Reddit. One of his fans asked him about that particular scene without mentioning it was supposedly completely spontaneous. The actor said that he was especially fond of that scene and had been looking forward to it as soon as he read the script. In fact, the director wasn't sure if any of the actors would be able to hit Malkovich in an acceptably low number of takes. In hindsight, it would have been a pretty bad idea to actively encourage extras to do things that might harm actors and ruin takes, so everyone should have found the story dubious even before Malkovich accidentally corrected them. So I really hope you enjoyed that video, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for brand new videos every day of the week. Also, I've got another channel, it's called Today I Found Out, and on that channel we have content very much like this, but we dive into one specific subject in more depth. You can check that out through the icon on the screen now. But if you're looking for something else to watch right now, why not check out another Top 10s video, or indeed a Today I Found Out video over there on the right. And as always, thank you for watching.